in the business that I'm in, Metroland Media, Metroland doing media and marketing, we rise and fall based on the rhythms of our business community at large. And we've seen one swath of our business community, as we all know, really struggle. They're forced to close, restricted capacity, inventory issues, and managing health and safety, staffing issues, and frankly, tragically, some of them didn't make it. And then we have another swath of the business community who had stresses of their own. They've had these peaks in demand that were unprecedented. Home improvement businesses, some real estate, some grocery, and they've had to manage their own inventory and logistics issues, their own staffing issues, their own health and safety management around COVID and contagion. And now are in this place where they're wondering if this peak ends in a precipice or not, and how do you plan for that? And granted, that's the preferred scenario, but it's a business stress nonetheless. And in our business, as a significant number of business people move from seeing marketing as an intrinsic cost of operation to a discretionary cost because they have to save money to keep margins, it's affected us, and we've become a little bit leaner. And the tactics that we offer have probably evolved a lot faster than we anticipated. But we also have a silver lining, and our silver lining is that our audience is bigger than it has ever been before. Because every time Doug Ford stood up in Queen's Park and said we're at yellow or level 2, people would turn to local media like us to see who's open, who's closed, what they can do, what they can't do, what local COVID numbers are, how the hospital's coping. And so our audience has grown substantially, and we think we'll sustain that. So why am I kind of selfishly talking about our business as we talk about the business community at large? It's because I believe that we can all start to look for silver linings like ours as we exit this pandemic. And I want to leave you with 3, as futurists, as business owners and operators who are there in the community, I want to leave you with 3 potential silver linings for consideration. We have moved further and more quickly into e-commerce as a way of serving and reaching our consumers than we anticipated. And for a large segment of our consumers, that's here to stay. Where we are, I would make the case that we have valuable brands that the rest of Ontario doesn't have. We have brands like Georgian Bay, Parry Sound, Algonquin Park, Lake of Bays, Muskoka, our smaller brands like Baysville, happy 50th anniversary of Baysville. If we can tie those brands individually as businesses and collectively as a business community to the growth in e-commerce, can we now reach a larger consumer base beyond those who have driven into or live in Muskoka, Parry Sound, or Omega? Secondly, there's this other group of consumers who really realized that they've taken for granted how valuable the local shopping experience and dining experiences are. And they're ready to surge back into our businesses, or they're starting to already, with that renewed appreciation. Someone said to me earlier this week, they were very excited. They went into a local retail outlet, and when they got there, they almost felt like they were in the way and underappreciated. So they have high expectations after this pandemic of that local experience. So how do we avoid that? And more than that, how do we take advantage of this renewed interest in shopping local, which has been very important throughout this pandemic and remains just as important now? And lastly, you can tell by all the video screens here, we've kind of accidentally discovered that a lot of us can work from home. It is no secret that a better place to live is where we live. And people in the GTA now realize that they can be where we are all year, more months of the year, or more weeks of the year, or more days of the year. So our population has grown and our demographics have changed in a very short amount of time. So how do we, as independent business people and collectively as a business community, shift and take advantage of that as a silver lining? So those are kind of the three thoughts that I started pondering based on Pamela's question that I think are worth ongoing consideration as we get out of this pandemic. And thank you, Pamela, for inviting me today.
Thank you, Jack. Thanks for joining us. Next up, we have Nora Fountain from the Muskoka Lakes Chamber of Commerce. Hi, Nora.
Hello there. I did get kicked out right at the very beginning, so I'm not sure what your first question was. I know that Stuart will speak about the need for broadband and our new digital reality, but so I don't know if you want to repeat the question or whether you just want me to reflect on what Jack just mentioned.
Yeah, Nora, if you could just let folks know who you are and what is your perspective? What do you think? What's going to happen now?
Okay, so I'm Nora Fountain. I'm the Executive Director of the Muskoka Lakes Chamber of Commerce, which has grown actually quite significantly through COVID. In my past life, I was a corporate communications specialist, and I was often involved in crisis communications, so I thought I saw it all until COVID. And it's interesting, and when I first looked at post-pandemic recovery, we're going to be talking about this, I said to myself, well, from the very beginning, I said it was never too early to talk about post-pandemic recovery. If we want to thrive in the new normal, we needed to, from day one, start thinking about scenarios of what it was going to look like in the future. At the same time, I also think that to speak about post-pandemic right now with great authority is also a bit of a mistake. The reality is that if companies are going to thrive in what is the new normal, we also have to accept that we're going to be living with COVID for a while. So it's a little early to say post-pandemic, but it's never too early to think about what it's going to look like in the future in this new normal. So that's sort of where I would start. I'd also just want to caution everybody to remember that businesses, some of them are only opening their doors for the first time tomorrow. And they've had to deal with suddenly you can go. So we have to find staff in the worst labor market we've ever experienced. They're under a lot of pressure. So they're still in response mode. They're dealing with day-to-day things. And yet at the same time, somehow we have to get them to take some time to reflect on what 2023 is going to look like. And I hope I get to speak to that a little bit longer because my eyes are set on what does 2023 look like? Because I think we're still going to be living with a lot of uncertainty for a while through 2022.
Okay, let's come back to that for sure, Nora. Thank you. And next we have Dave Gray from Almaguin. Hi, Dave.
Hi, how are you?
Well, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to join the call.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So for those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet yet, my name is Dave Gray. I'm the Director of Economic Development for Almaguin Community Economic Development. And I guess just very briefly, we provide economic development services from basically the northern border of Huntsville straight through to the northern border of Powassan. And kind of everywhere in between. I guess the easier way of saying it is that we try to provide economic development services along the Highway 11 corridor from Huntsville to North Bay in between. So that's kind of where we are in a nutshell. And it's been an interesting, to say the very least, without downplaying anything, an interesting experience over the last number of months, and indeed since the beginning of COVID. And it's been, we've had the good fortune to be able to provide some support to businesses, and we've certainly fielded a lot of calls from businesses who were struggling to access supports that were available, or were striking out finding supports that would help them meet their goals, to keep their doors open, to keep their operations moving. And in between all of these calls that we've been having, there has been some interesting positive results. However, it's important to take a moment and reflect that as Nora mentioned, up until tomorrow, there's ultimately people that are still very much affected, having incomes very much disrupted by the effects of the pandemic. And I don't want to kind of ride on that coattail, but looking at the employment market, I think it's not just consumer confidence that we're looking at having return. We're also looking at workers' confidence in returning to the workplace, most particularly particularly from a frontline perspective. You know, this has been a scary time. It's been a time of great concern for many people, and certainly working hand in hand with a lot of our employment agencies and employment offices, they're resonating that we have got employers looking for people, and there seems to be an absence of people looking for employment at this time. And I think really that does speak to that level of confidence. Interesting, and later in the call, I can speak to some of the positive indicators that we've seen here locally. And I know we're going to be talking about broadband and internet, but I think we are seeing the resilience of some of our small business operators, that entrepreneurial spirit, you know, kind of being elevated as people have to find new ways to conduct their businesses, to get their products and services out there, to market in a digital space where you know, a high level of comfort or aptitude for adopting digital mediums for advertising is it might not have been there, you know, before the pandemic. So it's I think that, you know, my heart goes out to those who have struggled greatly and who continue to struggle greatly. And you know, there are some positive, like I mentioned, positive things that I think are pointing towards a good recovery in the future. So, but more on that later. I don't want to take up any more time than I don't want to take away from anybody else's time.
Thank you, Dave. That's thoughtful. Okay, so a visionary, a futurist, Stuart Morley.
Thanks, Pamela. In order to perhaps make this exciting for the audience, I would like to put a couple of interesting thoughts on the table that have not been raised so far, if I may. With my background with Parry Sound Muskoka Community Network, we're a FedNor-funded organization. Our job is to advocate for broadband, it's to provide grants for businesses to adopt technology, and it's to help grow the digital talent base, which has been largely helping school programs with robotics, etc. I have a second hat, which is my consulting business, and I have my family and grandchildren that live in this area. So I'd like to raise some things that are probably not on people's radar screens. The first one was Intuit, which is the QuickBooks company, recently released a study to show that there were 2 million new businesses started in Canada in the last 12 months. If we get our prorated share in Parry Sound Muskoka, where we have 100,000 people, say, as a percentage of the 36 million people, even if 80% of those new businesses are what we call a side hustle or an opportunity to make a few dollars from a hobby or whatever, say it's only 20% are bona fide businesses, that means that there's been 1,000 businesses started in our community in the last year. Where are they? What are they doing? And that's quite exciting. The second one I wanted to raise is that the Scotiabank put out a study recently looking at the number of houses that we have, number of people per 1,000 homes compared to the G8. And the bottom line is if we were to have the same number of people per 1,000 homes, it's in the 400, and I think in the rest of the world it's about 450 people per, 450 homes for 1,000 people. I got my stats wrong around. Whereas we're short. In other words, we're short on that basis by 1.8 million homes in Canada. And again, if we're having our share problem, we're probably short somewhere around 2,000 to 3,000 homes in Parry Sound Muskoka if we have the same problem. Now, interestingly, everybody's talking about housing and the cost of housing. What I found was that prior to COVID, we've been having discussions with business folks, and the issue of housing isn't just the issue of housing. It's not a useful discussion unless you also talk about transport. It's amazing how many companies, yes, I can't afford, I've got employees prepared to move here, I can't find accommodation for them, but that's not enough, particularly with younger folks who don't drive, don't have a car, etc. And coming from the city with its transport systems, it's the whole issue of you need to talk about the housing in relation to the transport systems. And we don't have the typical Uber solutions and big transit systems they have in other communities. Third interesting one I'd like to raise is the inflation one. And we have a lot of debate going on between economists who claim the inflation rate is fairly small and maybe it's 5%. And then you have the anecdotal, what people are telling me on the streets is the real inflation rate. So the anecdotal evidence, which is fairly small, but I think has a lot of power, is for a lot of people, the real inflation rate is probably closer to 15 to 20%. If that's true, then what does that mean if you're a business? If you're a business that can put your prices up 10 or 15%, you're probably going to be okay if that's the true inflation. So a lot of the people that talk to these kinds of inflation are talking about what it costs them to rent a new home or buy a new home, what it costs them for students or student loans, what it's costing them food in the store, what the gas prices at the pump. And so I think the inflation one's a very interesting one. And the argument why the inflation may be higher is that with all these quantitative easing and projects that the government's been doing, it seems like that kind of inflation is popping up in the stock market and is popping up in the real estate market. And is that going to flow through to the rest of the market? So to set people off for discussion, Pamela, 3 thoughts. One was essentially the whole issue of how many new businesses are out there. The second issue around if we're going to be thinking about the whole housing question, which is a big one, thinking about that in terms of the transport question. And the third interesting one is essentially the last point that I made in terms of inflation.
Okay, there's so much there to unpack. Thank you, Stuart. And we're also talking about Nora's 2023 and Dave's where are we going to get staff? Is there, from what we've talked about so far, from our folks who are here on this call, are there any questions? Jeffrey looks like he wants to say something. Hands up. Hold on. I'll unmute you, Jeffrey.
Okay. I'm coming from a very outside perspective from the whole thing. And there's a larger direction here that I could go. I'm not sure if I want to go there just yet. I want to kind of get a feel for how the energy and the dynamic of this group is going to work. Dave, I noticed, or I observed your comment on people looking for work. And yes, that is very much true. I could look at myself as a possible example of that. Yes, I'm currently based in Parry Sound. Sorry, I better give you a little bit of background on who I am first so that you know where I come from. I grew up in Parry Sound. I was very active in the community from a young age. And I was president of student council, co-chair of fundraising. I was a champion badminton player all through high school. And I participated in a number of community events. I left Parry Sound to go and study a degree in radio and television from Ryerson, and I have experience in the media profession, and I also have multinational corporate experience, and I walked away from all of that, a high salary, to go and study at the UN-mandated University for Peace to get a master's degree in peace education, which basically is a worthless degree, but that's beside the point. We are in uncharted waters. And I say this from a bigger picture perspective, but also a bigger picture perspective. And what I mean by that is that I see the world from a couple of angles. One being the more, for lack of a better term, I'll call it a 3-dimensional consciousness, where we're learning about all the lies, all the crimes, all the frauds being perpetrated against humanity and the planet at this time. There's also the larger, bigger picture question. What is the meaning of life as we are currently living it? And is this really the kind of lives that humans were meant to live, being in a system where we are essentially economic slaves to another group? Now, I'm not going to go into that. I know that some of you may disagree with that, and that's perfectly okay. I'm very okay with that. I have spent about 25 years looking at the whole global condition and the spiritual condition too. So I see a much longer pattern of the events that have happened that are creating what we are now experiencing in the world. Now, to bring it more directly back to this region, I'm going to read part of the municipal bylaw from Parry Sound as it relates to mask wearing. And I'm just going to select out the couple of key parts here. Whereas health authorities at the federal and provincial level have recommended that persons wear face coverings in public where physical distancing cannot be maintained. And whereas the medical officer of health for North Bay Parry Sound District Health Unit has recommended the use of face coverings when physical distancing cannot be maintained. I'm not sure if you're hearing what I'm reading here, but the key word there is recommended. The federal government has not really legislated anything as far as mask mandates and the like. What they have done is they've transferred it to the provinces. The provinces, not wanting the liability of future harm of masks, has legislated it and passed it down to the municipality. So that's what I'm seeing in the text here from the municipal bylaw. They are acting on a recommendation, not on a direct legal foundation. And this
have you found, Jeffrey, that this has had an effect on your business, the masking?
Well, I myself don't have a business in Parry Sound, but I am back to share a vision about how we can rebuild the town to be healthy, clean, green, and self-sustainable.
Okay,
and,
can we bring our focus in and get to a question for the group?
Right. Well, what I'm actually just trying to point out is I'm seeing a concern for the business community here. Because if what I'm reading here is correct, then that means that the businesses are going to be held liable in the future when everything is finally exposed as far as the mask mandate goes. And when harm starts to come from either vaccines or the masks, the liability is going to fall on the business owner. And the business owner, not really understanding what's going on, they're going to say, well, I'm following the law, but if I'm reading this correctly, at least here in Parry Sound, they're not acting on a law. They're acting on a recommendation, which means a lot of businesses could potentially face lawsuits across the province, across the country, because the businesses will say, well, we'll sue the government. The government will say, well, no, we just gave you a recommendation. We didn't actually pass the law. You chose to follow it. Now, all of a sudden, the businesses are going to find themselves in trouble. So to keep it relevant to this discussion, my concern is, are we adequately informing the business community of their potential liability in the face of all of this?
Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Nora felt like she had some.
Yes, I would like to speak to that. There is a lot to unpack there. And first I'm going to start that I agree that we do need, and we're looking to government for regulations. Right now, some of the test cases out there, University of Western, Fanshawe College, places that are demanding that you have at least one vaccine and have another one in the offing if you want to come into residence, for example. But I want to put it back to you a different way, Jeffrey, because I think in the end, just like almost everything that's happened through the COVID, it will be business and individuals that push what actually happens. And if we want businesses and everyone to succeed and thrive in what I continue to call the new normal, is we are going to have to embed trust as the catalyst for recovery. And when I'm talking about embedding trust, I don't mean just the business, I mean the suppliers, I mean the customers, everything. I mean, here's a perfect example. The Good Life Fitness, which isn't here, it's mostly in the city, their motto is be all in for you and your health. And then they were all excited that they're opening tomorrow. And on social media, they said, yay, we're coming in, we're open on Friday. And one person innocently asked, will you be asking that your staff and your members be vaccinated? And they came back with a comment saying that due to privacy, we are not going to divulge whether our staff needs to be vaccinated or members need to be vaccinated or not. I urge you to go look at the Twitter feed response to that. In fact, oddly enough, at exactly the same time, Fillmore's, which is a strip club in Toronto, came out with a statement that all of their staff will be double vaccinated, will be wearing masks, and although they'll be taking their customers' word for it, they're going to say you're going to have to be vaccinated before you come into Fillmore's. So a lot of people made the comment that, wow, it will be healthier to go to a strip club than to a Good Life Fitness. So when I say embed trust, is that first of all, we all have to get vaccinated. We really need to do this because we're never going to achieve herd immunity if we don't. And there are some reasons, and there are good reasons why some people perhaps can't, although that's being argued. So we have to embed trust. And I just want to add one other thing that you said, Jeffrey, that I thought was really, really key when you were talking about, sort of slaves to our economy. The other thing we really need to do is recommit to our people. So you remember back in the 80s, everybody started talking about work-life balance, and that's all it was. It was just talk. Here is an opportunity for us to really look and recommit to our people, to their mental health as they come back during this uncertain time, to looking at, does this work for them to work remotely a couple of days and then on-site a couple of days? Everything has shifted. Stuart spoke about how many new businesses have been created. People during COVID looked at their lives and went, I'm not sure I want to do this anymore, and started new businesses and shifted careers and took courses. So everything is changing so much. So I think trust is really important, and I think it's something that nobody's really talking about. We want to be able to trust each other and our neighbors. We want to trust our suppliers who are bringing in our meat to our restaurant, that they've been vaccinated. We want to recommit to our people, so we give them, really good reasons about why they want to work for us. And I just think that those are really important things. I hope that answered it a little bit, Jeffrey, because I said, the governments are going to wait to see if the universities have legal action before they actually give us direction. And they should be providing us direction. And back to what I said about earlier, from day one, they should have been futurist and telling us what it's going to look like in 2023.
Thank you, Nora. Thank you. And yeah, Jeffrey brought up a whole lot, but I think that speaks to a piece of it. For sure. Now, Nora, while we have you, we have another question for you from Elizabeth Boyle, who wants to know what will be the keys to success for businesses during this time? So maybe in the short run.
Yes. And of course, I come from a perspective of watching businesses across all sectors who've been dealing with this. So one of the things, it's also a futurist thing. First of all, look around you. Look around at everything. Why are we now dealing with supply chain issues? When COVID hit, 4 out of every 5 employees suddenly weren't working. Did nobody think that maybe that's going to affect supply chain? We're waking up now and going, oh my gosh, we have supply chain problems. So look around you at everything that you're doing. Look at, here's an example. Remember when you used to go into a business and if you were going to spend $5 or less, they wouldn't take your debit card because it cost them money on their their point of sale processing machine. So even that, are you getting dinged a lot on that? Because who's going to be carrying cash again? I'm not. I don't want heavy coins in my purse. So find yourself, people should be very competitive right now on those kinds of things. That's a very small thing. But then, for supply chain, how can you help your suppliers? How are you going to, be sure that you're going to have that inventory flowing? When is that going to change? So again, look around a 360 degree at what's going on and think about how that can be better in 2023. I mean, you're going to be working on it right now, but it's going to take a while for all of these engines to get rolling again. Like you look at cars sitting in lots that are going nowhere because they're missing a microchip from China. I mean, we should have known that, but we didn't because our eyes were on the prize every day dealing with other things. And then secondly, have you set the conditions to thrive in the new normal? Have you looked at your space? Have you looked, and that's something that Stuart might talk to later, but cybersecurity for employees that may still be working remotely. So you need to set these conditions to flourish, and they need to be set now. And certainly digitization, I mean, nobody's going back, right? It's in May 2020, $4 billion was spent online compared to like very little in the 2 months previous. So do you have an online presence? If you don't, the data is not looking good for you. So you need to be setting those conditions to flourish right now. And again, it's so hard to ask businesses to do that, especially when they're just reopening their doors. But take time, sit back and reflect on what that's going to look like when things are better, And that's what you want to really be aiming for. Put yourself in that position about what that looks like and put those things into place now. And the good news is, and I think that that was spoken about earlier by Dave, is that a lot really did move very quickly. We're so resilient. We've been incredibly resilient here. And I also think that Muskoka and Parry Sound, and maybe even more so Muskoka, that we've had a little bit of a bubble because we haven't had a lot of illness. And we've had a lot of, cottagers that said, now's the time to start my do-it-yourself project, discovered they couldn't do it. All our contractors are busy. So some people have been overwhelmed with work, and then others have had nothing at all. But I think we've been cushioned a little bit, and it's given people time to be able to sit back and take a look at what they need to do to move forward. And I think Stuart's inflation point is really important too. And I'd like to talk about that a little bit later regarding the Canadian Emergency Bank Account. Like, why are banks not letting us pay it back? That's something I want to raise. So you got to think about, are you going to be able to pay back that $60,000 at the end of 2022? So those are all questions about you have to look at all of these things. So look around you, set your conditions to flourish.
Thank you, Nora. Dave, would you like to expand on what do businesses need to be doing now?
Well, I think I think Nora touched on a lot of things, and I think in understanding what the conditions are, like understanding what your conditions are to be able to do business, it's really taking the time to look around and see what supports are available to businesses to help them make those transitions and to help them pivot. And I mean, that pivot word seems to be a buzzword that's flying around, and as cliche as it may sound nowadays to someone who's in the business, it is still very much true. I mean, I look at our experiences working with businesses through programs such as Digital Main Street, helping people adapt to those online digital presence pieces, and I think that there are so many other supports that are out there that may not be that cash grant in your pocket, but may help solve a piece of the puzzle. As Nora put it, it may help you set one more of those conditions into place, and taking the time to reach out to see, because as the business environment has been changing, the support networks have been changing, and in a lot of cases, when you're delivering support programming, but you're getting calls left, right, and center outside of a mass email blast, it's almost impossible for support practitioners to be able to pick up the phone and contact every business and kind of triage each one based on what their needs might be at any given time. Another piece of advice that I could give to businesses is communicate what you are doing to keep your staff and your customers safe, and to speak to any lacks of confidence that any of those users would have, and be open, be able to be found. I mean, that really dovetails back into the digital presence piece. But for me, if I know I can myself go into a place that is enforcing some kinds of rules, or at least I have an understanding of what it is that they've done to accommodate people who may be more fearful coming in, then I can discern for myself whether or not, as a consumer, I'm comfortable going into said environment. And I'm not, I try to stay away as much as possible from the, should you enforce mask wearing, should you not? Regardless of my personal beliefs, which I will not state. Again, we're not here to get into that debate today. I think at the end of the day, you need to be communicating what it is being enforced. And I think for the most part, if I was to give one piece of personal, personal feeling, is that I think at the end of the day, we as humans, we as people, we as neighbors need to be doing what we can to keep our neighbors and people around us in our network safe. I'll leave it at that. I won't go into what you shall and what you shall not do, but I think more and more I see people abiding by that same common thread of wanting to keep people safe. So as a business, if you're able to communicate that these are the policies and procedures we have in place to keep you safe, then people can make the decision. Is it going to be a fix-all cure that's not going to have somebody blowing up at your front line? I mean, I don't think you're ever going to be able to keep everybody happy. However, you take a look at that chat between, or that comparison between between Good Life and the exotic dancing facility, and I think that right now we are coming out of one of the most divisive times, because as people are self-isolating, there is so much negativity that's being fueled online from multiple different areas. You've got so many socio-political causes that are going on right now, and I hate to not to coin the term, but to use the term, everybody's stuck inside, internalizing all of this information, and they're choosing which side of the division they want to fall on, based on maybe headlines, maybe there's some research. So you've got people that are uncomfortable and are fired up, and unfortunately can reach a boiling point quicker than normal. So those types of things, there is some imbalance there, but I've always been a firm believer, to spin it to a positive note here, that discomfort is the ultimate catalyst for change. And certainly with some of the results that we've seen, I did promise some positive indicators. We've seen in year over year 125% increase in startup support being requested through our office. We've seen 10 times more expansion calls from businesses that are looking to expand. We've seen an 80% increase in referral to funding and other supportive organizations. So people are out there, they're looking to do the next big thing. They're looking maybe to reinvent themselves, as Nora mentioned. They're leaving this type of employment, they're going into being an entrepreneur. So, there's a number of other positive indicators that we've been seeing through our office. And certainly our biggest focus is to support those folks, but also support those who are still trudging through the trenches to be able to rebalance where their businesses are. I think that in a time of such uncertainty, not just around COVID, but again, all those socio-political issues that seem to be in the sharing the spotlight, I think the biggest thing that we can do is communicate our way through it, and ensure that we are encouraging comfort and consideration as much as possible.
Okay, thanks, Dave. So we're uncomfortable, and that's motivating folks to find the next big thing. As always, our time gets away from us so quickly in these things. So I'm going to give each of our guests 3 minutes to round up, starting with Jack.
So many well-spoken, thoughtful presentations and thoughts shared today that it's hard to know where to go, because I want to talk to each of our speakers about the various things they've said at length. I want to, like Nora, I want to unpack the local inflation that Stuart mentioned, and why that might look different than national inflation numbers. I think that's important. Like Dave, I can't. Our business folks must be exhausted of when it comes to having to make decisions around social political issues, when they just want to make business decisions about their consumers and treat all their consumers as equal. Business is difficult right now, and I think other than putting your head down and working hard, I think we have to understand that as consumers, that the business people, their goal is relatively simple, and it's to serve us the best they can. And the more that we as consumers can remove the complications that didn't used to be business complications, social political issues being one of them, the better we're serving our business community.
Thank you, Jack. Stuart, what more do you have to, I know you have so much knowledge for us, but in 3 minutes.
Thanks, Pamela. To build on some of the comments around being helpful to businesses, I think there's, in the 3 minutes, three other thoughts. One is opportunity to do teamwork. It's not just go get hold of Starlink so you can get an internet connection to your business, but look at what people like Nora are doing with Muskoka, Shop Local Muskoka, get together with other businesses to have essentially online marketplaces and online discussion groups. And I think a key message for this is we need to be more resilient rather than being more efficient. And being resilient is about making sure we get to meet and chat to as many people as possible. I know business owners have a lot to do, but often your future customers aren't the same as today. Your future employees aren't the same as today. the future suppliers aren't the same. And how are you going to find those other people? It's only going to be by networking and getting out there and building bigger and newer networks. So the team and network is one. The second is, I think we've got a wall of people coming to our area. I think we have, if you look at the economics, the study recently done on the extended golden horseshoe, they're looking at Barrie doubling population in the next 10 years. Aurelia going up 50%. Some of those folks are coming north. If you look at the U-Haul statistics, the biggest one-way U-Hauls are to North Bay. So you've got these kinds of challenges that are happening. I think the third one is essentially, I would suggest, is looking at a whole different way of working. We've got a situation where, to use an example, we did a project some years ago on the main streets of Bracebridge, Gravenhurst, Huntsville, and Parry Sound, providing free Wi-Fi. And in return, we tracked businesses when they were using, and people on the streets when they were using their cell phones. And most businesses were open 9 to 5, but guess when people are using their cell phones most? 5 till 9. So I think there's an opportunity to do a big switch. Imagine if our downtowns only came alive at night. If our shops didn't open before noon or 2 or 3, and our downtown became this thriving 5 to 9 life instead of a 9 to 5. So those are some thoughts, closing thoughts, Pamela.
Thank you, Stuart. Nora.
It helps to unmute yourself. There's so much more I want to say, but I think I'm going to go back a little bit, because one of the first things I said was, reflect, about what you're doing right now, but also go to the dock, take your favorite beverage, reflect on what you managed to do over this past 2 years, and give yourself a hug, because those are few and far between right now. And then take the moment, and I said it before and I just want to repeat it. So now imagine what 2023 looks like. What are your employees saying about you in 2023? How have you managed in the last couple of years to make sure your supply chain is working well for you? Let's see, I had some other things. How did you embed trust in them and your employees and your customers? And what Dave was saying earlier about nobody's going to make any moral judgments here, but the market's going to make that decision for you. Just recently, I was in a store where 2 people were in wearing masks all way off in the corner. 3 people came in and they said, "Oh, we don't have masks." And the person said, "Oh, that doesn't matter." The other 2 walked out. And so I talked to that person later and I said, "So those 2 people, tell 2 people, what did you just do to yourself? Potentially. I'm not being one of these ones, you must wear a mask, you must do this, but the market is going to make that decision for you. So, err on the side of safety. You've got to embed trust. There's, again, so much. Thank you for the shout out on shopmuskokalakes.ca. We are taking on Amazon. Working together, I think that's the other thing about the supports that people talked about. We didn't even talk about supports at Chamber, because that's not what this was about. But people are really going to support each other. Your contractors, let's get your event services people, let's get them working. I'm telling people where to put tents all the time while it's raining. So there's a lot of support within each other. So reach out and just ask for help, because it is out there, whether it be through a colleague, whether it be through Parry Sound Muskoka Community Network, through your AcDev officer, through the Chamber. There is a lot going on. We do have to triage to a certain extent, but that is what is making us more relevant than we've ever been before, is helping people through this and helping people through to hopefully when we can actually say we're post-pandemic. Thank you for the time today.
Thank you so much, Nora. Dave.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate a lot of the great comments, and certainly, a lot of what Stuart spoke to is, are some big things to keep a weather eye on the horizon. Very interesting things that are, that are happening. I guess on a more positive side, and this is completely anecdotal because I know that we're still waiting for a lot of the data to come back in. But taking a look here in Almaguin at just the amount of new families, for those of you who, again, I may not have met, I'm quite an active walker and runner and cyclist, and walking through the village right now, I see a lot of new families coming into the area, a lot of the effects of what's referred to as life cycle housing, folks looking to move on to easier homes to live in, and new families coming in to support that. And, I guess I would forecast that we're going to see, from a relative perspective of growth in the region over the last little while, we are going to see a little bit of a bounce in some of those numbers, despite the housing, ultimately the housing crisis that's being experienced in many areas right now. And I think that, when I saw a lot of the home sales coming through the municipal offices, I said, well, it's only going to be a matter of time before this starts to spill over into our downtowns and some of our small areas that have vacancies downtown. That somehow have managed to survive and not become, like rental or like apartments. We've started to see some of that happening because you bring new people and new people demand services, and you see, new ideas coming out. So very slowly, I see a lot of that starting to trickle in. And I think that that will breed some positivity, some positive change coming out. I've even just something as interesting and unique as the boom in food trucks and seasonal food restaurants that are popping up all over the place. People trying their hand at entrepreneurialism, I think, is very exciting and very encouraging to see. But again, I make these comments without wanting to take away from some of the struggle that is currently still being experienced. And I think that all of the comments made today about just doing what you can to be cognizant of the environments, cognizant of some of the changes that are coming down the pipeline, and hopefully any downtime that you've experienced has been you found an opportunity to look at to look at what's around there and how you can change to meet the needs of a changing environment and a changing consumer base. So again, I look at it with I hate to use the term cautious optimism. I think there's a lot of optimism, but certainly it's important to maintain a constant focus on how the environment is still changing. And we may not be looking back at going back to the glory days, the good old days, or exactly how it used to be. What of it can we keep, and what of it are we going to have to adapt to? Are large philosophical questions that that I think we're all going to be facing as we navigate it. But it's important to note you don't have to navigate it by yourself.
Thank you, Dave. Great. And thank you, everybody. What a deeply layered conversation. We will be posting it. I know I'm going to listen to it again because there's a lot here to unpack. Next week, we're going to be talking about something very related, the job market. I invite you to join us for that, and we will see you next Thursday at noon. Thank you.
Thanks very much for the opportunity.